I've had the benefit of speaking with Tariq at a couple of these things, so I'm going to start and pick on him first.
Oh, man.
I want to ask you a question that I've been pondering, which is, can a company, once it's started, change its culture? Let's say it's 2, 3, 4 years in. Can they reverse course if things aren't going so great?
It's a tough question. It's a tough question. I think that I don't want to subscribe to the ideology that for somehow, us going down a path that may not be the best for the teams that we're building, that we get to a place where we're not able to reverse course. I don't want to subscribe to that, because I think that hopelessness doesn't invoke any type of change in any of the enterprises that we belong to or any of the businesses that we're a part of. I do think that the journey starts with a serious introspection and the company's culture, the company's offerings, and the team member experience that it's offering to its employees. I also think that the way our companies evolve over time is very much shaped by the national discourse around the issues that are impacting our team, right? So the companies and the experiences that my mother or my grandmother had, who were both single working class women in a number of industries, and the experiences that I'm having as a young brother living in San Francisco is quite different, right? And the experiences that each of us have multi-generationally is very much tied to what's happening in our world.
I should mention that Tariq used to do this very same thing at Lyft, which of course is Uber's nemesis. We all know what Uber's going through, and then he decided to go to Coinbase, and I'm sure we've all heard about the phenomenon of the blockchain bros.
Sure.
So he has not shied away from any challenge.
Absolutely not, and I think it's because, we live in a world now that is so focused on what tears us apart, right? And we live in a world now where the national discourse focuses on how we're different, instead of focusing on what brings us together, right? And for me, what I'm finding even in the diversity and inclusion space is that we focus a lot on diverse candidates. How many folks have heard the term diverse candidate, have used the term diverse candidate, instead of actually focusing on building diverse teams and identifying the things that actually bring us closer together? So when I go back to this point around introspection, it takes a critical moment for companies to take a moment and say, what are my team members experiencing, not only inside of my walls, but how are their life experiences actually coming to work with them every day? And how is that impacting how we do our best work and how we grow our business and how we scale our business? And so when companies have that honest conversation with themselves to understand that employees bring their full selves to the office every day, then we can start having the tough conversation about cultural change and what's needed from a policy, practice, and programming standpoint to actually bring about that change long term.
Jolen, you're working at a very established organization. It's been around for a very long time. Do you think that these are skills that can be learned, or do you just sort of get it, or you don't?
Yeah. I totally think that inclusion, diversity, all of it is absolutely a competency. It is something that can be taught, but it requires focus, it requires effort.
Sure.
Because it could really be broken down to a set of behaviors that you teach people, and then you hold them accountable for it. So we very much at Visa have focused on breaking down what does it mean to be an inclusive leader? What are our expectations of how managers and employees are coming together, showing up every day in conversations? And by the way, to be inclusive, it's the everyday basic things. It's not necessarily rocket science. It's asking people, how are you? Hello. Looking people in the eye, trying to understand their experiences, trying to be an empathetic leader. Those are the things that help people feel like they belong in a workplace. And we very much have focused on building a curriculum through our Visa University that helps leaders unlock those behaviors. We think it can be trained. It's a competency. I absolutely believe that.
So, Hale, you started a business within Citigroup, and you had the opportunity of starting sort of from scratch. Where did you begin? And how soon did you start thinking about these things?
Actually, it's a very established business. It's a fast-growing business within Citi, which is a 200-plus year tradition and history. Where you begin is really by building the team. You build the team ground up with people who are like-minded, who have similar values, and as Jolen said, we attract people who are diverse, and it's important to have unique perspectives on the team, because if you don't have unique perspectives on the team, that richness in decision making isn't there, and it doesn't flow through to the bottom line of the organization, nor does it flow through to the client experience, nor does it flow through to the employee experience. So it's really important to have the right talent on the ground, and the right talent does the right thing if they're held accountable to the right behaviors.
So, Maggie, people in this room are very familiar with the Boys Club of Silicon Valley and the Boys Club of Corporate America, but you've been fighting to change the world of rugby for women.
Yes.
What are you fighting for?
I guess what we're fighting for is equality. So who knows rugby out there? I'm going to throw this out there. Yes, we have some rugby people. This is good. I've spent the last few days trying to educate people about rugby. It's NFL without the pads, basically. That's the gist of it. So what we're fighting for is equality, and I think that what the general perception of rugby has always been is that it's been a male-dominated sport. I guess, you know, for people who are Caucasian, who are middle-aged, that's always been the perception of it. And actually what I guess my role and many others' role has been is to try and change that. It's to change that perception so that the entry point is greater. There's more people coming into our sport that it becomes almost normal to look at it. And I guess we are making those changes. As you will see, obviously, on the weekend, or as of tomorrow, you'll see many other women out there playing the sport who have found the sport just because opportunities opened up for them. And there's many out there who are still fighting for it in their own countries because it's still a sport that, unfortunately, the stereotypes are still dominating, I guess, the way people get into the sport.
So I want to talk a little bit about what you're still up against because, you know, the Forbes top paid athletes list just came out, 100 people and not a single woman.
They had not seen my pay slip.
Not a single The U.S. women's soccer team won the World Cup and got like $2 million, and the men's team lost and got $8 million.
It's very frustrating. So in 2014, my England women's team won the World Cup. So we won the World Cup.
Can we get a round of applause for that?
I mean, what makes it better is that we beat Canada. I mean, so, but we won, sorry for those Canadians in the crowd, but we won the World Cup. And I think what was amazing is that, you know, it's taken us 20 years to get to that point. And the men had won it in 2003. And the whole team got MBEs, so they got, or knighthoods from the Queen. And our England team, only 2 people got given those knighthoods and honorary awards, but also our fees and our salary did not change. So, you know, we all had second jobs. And the frustrating thing is that we just get on with it. We do what we do, and almost we saw it as quite acceptable. It's okay, and that's the problem. And now I think there's been this massive shift that actually now we're calling people out. It's not acceptable. We do deserve more. We work equally as hard as the guys who are also trying to be top athletes.
It's not harder.
I mean, on the weekend, I went to see Serena Williams competing in the singles final.
Yes.
And she's absolutely amazing, a massive role model and inspiration to so many women and men, you know, about empowering yourself. And I think one thing it shows is that, let's say, look at the sport of tennis, regardless of whether you do 5 sets or 3 sets, you're still working hard to achieve an outcome. And I think that's what we're trying to fight for. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, the process still remains the same. And we deserve the same amount of money and professionalism as the men have.
So, amen.
But can I also just add to that? I think one thing, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's not about us versus them. Like, I think for us to really be successful, it's about having both genders working together. And I've been very fortunate to go where I have because I've had some fantastic men who've championed me along the way. So the guys in the room, thank you very much, because it's actually important that we have both genders working together, because actually the challenges that I've... You guys are a good group. You keep clapping everything I say. The challenges that I actually have had have probably been against women who probably don't want to bring me up. And actually, that's what we've got to try and work together. How do we get both genders working together to create diversity?
And actually, the research shows that women are more likely to be competitive with other women if it seems as if there's only room for one. So if there's only one woman on a board, they're much less likely to help other women because they think there's only room for one. And the same with the number of women on an executive team. But if there's 3 women on the board, it's a completely different situation, which is why we need to get the numbers changing. You know, I think in an organization where the CEO and leadership is on board, it's a much easier proposition. But organizations have a lot of different priorities, and this isn't always the first. How do you get a manager or a CEO on side when maybe they don't believe it's as important as you do?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to start with speaking the language of the individual that you're talking to. And money and results often talk. And the research and the data shows time and time again that diverse teams outperform. I was never an athlete, but I was an antitrust litigator, and I like to win. So I always start with the concept of winning, and diverse teams win. And I think you also look at just all the challenges around building organizations, the war for talent, how you're recruiting and attracting and maintaining these dynamic workforces. It really just speaks to the need to make sure that you're focused on diversity and inclusion as a business priority. So I always start with just trying to focus on the rationale, getting the head involved on why this is important. I think the next conversation is always about the heart. We say that, right? So thinking about how people feel, one of my favorite questions is sometimes asking individuals, what's a hidden aspect of diversity that someone may not know about them? And they may talk about having a child who's disabled, or having LGBT members of their family, or something else that connects them, just a sense of difference, right? Because everyone has that opportunity to understand difference. And if that doesn't work, I think the last piece of it is just accountability. So at some point, you got to get on the bus, or the bus is driving over you. And so I think that's the last piece of, do you have systems and metrics and mechanisms in place in your organizations to hold leaders accountable to the values that are important to your organization? And if you put those things in place, then you just need the leaders to show up and demonstrate the right behaviors and get on board.
Absolutely.
Tariq, you've worked now with several young, white, male
Sure have.
founders.
Yes.
What is the language you've used to talk to them about this?
Well, I think I've been fortunate enough to work for brands that have been so mission-driven and that have had their North Star focused on changing the world, right? I left a dynamic company that I was very much in love with, who offered me a very career-defining experience. And as Jolen and I were speaking before the panel, you have this moment where you know the work has been done and it's time to pass the baton to someone else. For Coinbase, the reason why I'm so inspired by the work that we're doing there, and fortunate enough to have an exec team and a leadership team that's very much bought in to the idea of diversity and inclusion, is because it's so closely tied to our mission, right? Our mission is to create an open financial system for the world, right? And we believe that an open financial system will bring about greater efficiency, innovation, and equality of opportunity in the world. There's a lot of mission-driven companies out there, but I haven't seen too many that talks about bringing equality of opportunity to a world that desperately needs it. And one that goes beyond our borders of the US, though we have a lot of work to do here. I think at Coinbase, our leadership team recognized pretty quickly, which is why I joined the organization so quickly, was because equality of opportunity has to start with us, that we have to model that. I think what most of us have seen in the discourse around diversity and inclusion, that there's such a focus on the numbers, right? And the numbers are incredibly important from an accountability standpoint, from an equity standpoint, from a business standpoint. But what we don't hear a lot about is actually the cultures that we're building, right? The poem that I often reference, and I think I referenced this with you, Emily, is that the flower doesn't dream of the bee, the flower blossoms and the bee comes. So many, the flower being an analogy or to the companies, the bee being these underrepresented communities that folks are competing for in terms of talent. I think that when you build a company and when you build a brand that's so focused on offering a dynamic employee experience, that's focused on keeping communities grounded and advancing the talent that they're actually able to recruit, you ultimately are able to grow the diversity of your organization over time. What we're seeing in the industry, though, is that folks are so laser focused on diversity that they're forgetting about the latter half around development and retention. So you're not seeing diversity metrics move, frankly, because we're not actually able to hold on to that talent. I often call that talent power. It's the fact that underrepresented groups have the ability now more than ever to choose where they want to go as our markets are becoming more saturated with this D&I language. So for me, I'm going to join a community, not one that says they practice D&I, but then when you really look at their culture and experience it's toxic, no. I know that they're ready to compete for my talent, so instead, I'm going to join an organization that's willing to keep our talent grounded and to advance it over time.
What if your mission isn't about democratizing opportunity or making the world a place? What if it's just about making money? Hale, how do you make the argument that diverse teams are better results?
I'm thrilled to say, yes, I mean, making money is important, but I'm thrilled to say that broadly, our mission is to enable growth and progress. So that is our mission-driven principles, even in driving results. So the way we drive results, the how is really important, and we can only drive the how with the right teams in place. So you were talking about how do we retain. So we talk about hiring more, promoting more, retaining more, and making sure that we are the employer of choice for diverse talent. It's very important to have the right programs for development. It's very important to have the right affinity groups where our talent align themselves with the affinity group that they're a part of. Those affinity groups at Citi are represented by the CEO's leadership team. They co-chair those affinity groups along with another member of the senior leadership team that belongs to that affinity. And we develop broad engagement from the talent on the ground. And it's a tone from the top with a grassroots effort from the bottom. And leadership plays a very strong role in promoting engagement with the networks, promoting engagement with the in-business diversity and inclusion efforts, and making sure that we weave it in to everything we do. As I said earlier, our business is a client-driven business. We are in the business of building lasting, multi-generational relationships. We can only do that if we mirror the community that we serve. If we are a uniform community, we don't represent the richness of our community externally. If we are very homogeneous internally, that's not going to resonate with anyone. Nobody feels valued, heard, and included, and that does not create the results that leaders are looking for either.
I'm hearing that being explicit about your mission, explicit about your values, talking about it is really important.
Absolutely.
In order to make progress. I get asked a lot about tokenism, and especially from young women and minorities who say, I think I'm only getting this opportunity because I'm black or because I'm a woman. And generally I say, well, take the job, kick ass, and prove that they need more of you. You know, we're seeing a lot more female sports commentators. I was really excited to see all the women commentating on the World Cup, but I know it's actually been a tough transition. Some people aren't prepared to listen to women commentators, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this idea of tokenism, you know, making some progress for optics' sake. Does it matter if it's not real progress?
Yeah. So for those that you probably won't know, that I'm a broadcaster as well. So back in England, I work on ITV, which is one of our main channels, which is free to air. I also am a broadcaster for the Rugby World Cup that's happening as of tomorrow. And I think it's quite interesting. So for the Men's Rugby World Cup, which took place in 2015, 15's rugby, I was the first female to be a pundit, so an announcer for the men's tournament. And I think what was quite interesting, the minute I took the stage and I started talking, you get a lot of negative comments. And it was amazing how, when I first started, all the comments were about me being a female. And over time, when people start to get to the point where they start to hear your voice regularly, start to see that you're visible, the comments started to be actually still quite negative, but more about the content. And actually, it takes time. It takes time for people to really almost become comfortable with that. So when people talk about tokenism, I actually think, you know, I probably was put onto that broadcasting team because I was a female and I was of an ethnic minority. But do you know what? It was my job to take responsibility of it and own it, and that's what I did. I owned it, and as a result of that, we've got many more women coming through. And I'm willing, I think one of the hardest things when you become that token, I guess, you've got to be willing to take the hits. And that's what it was. I took the hit to ensure that others came through. But when you become that token, you have to be bloody good. You have to be very good at what you do. And people ask me, so do you have to work hard when you're a pundit or a commentator? And I said, I have to work incredibly hard. I have to work double hard than some of the guys. So for example, when I go and talk tomorrow, people will ask me questions about the women's tournament, the men's tournament, under 20s. They'll talk to me about everything about rugby. But when they ask a man, they'll probably just talk to him about USA. And if he makes a mistake, it's okay, you know. If I make a mistake and I haven't understood what happened 3 weeks ago in another country, everyone will give me negative comments about it. But I've learned to take that hit. Like I said, it's about bringing more women through. And 30% is the big thing we talk about now. If you can get 30% on whatever it is, a panel, on a board, you get momentum, you get change. And we're starting to see it now. And the Men's Football World Cup, we saw some women who are pundits and commentators there. And they took a bashing, unfortunately. But what's great is more women are coming through. And it's going to lead to more momentum shifts.
So, you know, I think people who work in these diversity inclusion positions often do get a bashing as well, and we've heard about techlash and whitelash and manlash, and how do you handle the sort of resistance to this movement within your companies? And maybe the founders of Coinbase and Lyft really get it, but maybe there are people who work within the company who don't get it. They're the James Damore of Google who, sometimes I look at those people and I'm like, I don't know if they can ever be convinced.
Sure.
It's an interesting, I think, concept when you think about inclusion, and it feels like it's a zero-sum game. So I think that's where you have to make it very clear that what you're trying to do is grow an organizational culture where everyone belongs, where you are focused on achieving the best results for the company, and you're doing it in a way that includes everyone. So I think if you are transparent about what you're trying to accomplish, if you're clear on the mission and vision, and you tie it back to the leadership principles of your company, that really helps. I know one of the things that we talk about at Visa is that everyone is a leader. So we really try to bring this idea of it is the job of everyone, not just people managers or CEO or senior executives, but how everyone shows up every day living our values. That's going to help us be the company that we want to be. Back to winning in the market. Because we really want to be the best way to be paid by everyone everywhere. And in order to do that, we really need to understand different points of view. So I think if you start to just message around what inclusion really is, you're transparent about what you're trying to accomplish, and you continually bring people along, it really does help.
I agree, and I think that, I love the backlash, and, and I always have, because I think that what it shows is that it's a symptom of a couple of things. The first thing is that having conversations about race and sex and gender and identity and experience is not even something that we've mastered outside of our companies, right? We haven't even as a country or as a global enterprise really been able to have a tough conversation around racial healing, healing around a growing, gender pay gap, healing around a growing racial wealth gap, like systemic oppression that has impacted a number of the communities that we're trying to impact over time. We haven't had that conversation yet. I think the second piece is we haven't really spoke truthfully about why we do diversity, inclusion, and equity work. So I often, get questions outside of the business when I'm either on panels or meeting with other colleagues, which is why do we focus on women and minorities? Why African Americans and the Hispanic and Latinx community and women? And I think it's because we haven't really had a tough conversation about the grotesque underrepresentation that these communities have. That it's not that, diversity and inclusion or diverse candidates or whatever discourse you want to use is only focused on those folks, right, or those demographics, but that those are the demographics that are furthest at the margins, and that in order for us all to benefit, we have to center our worldview at the margins and bring those communities closer to the center so that we can make better decisions. I think the second piece around this idea of backlash or diversity of thought is that we can't assume that everyone from the same demographic thinks the same way.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that's where that ideology comes
Bernie
into
Sanders,
play.
Donald Trump.
Not everyone thinks the same way.
Right.
But what's telling to me is that we have to be better about messaging this idea of inclusion, this idea of belonging, as it being inclusive of majority group members, right? No matter what the demographic is. And we're not doing our job if we don't really tell the entire story of why it's important for us to build these type of teams in that type of way.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to end with something tactical. And I'm curious if each of you could give the people in this room one thing that they can start doing tomorrow that is realistic, that they can literally start doing in the next 24 hours to start working towards this, beyond just being inclusive. Hale, I'll start with you.
Hold people accountable for behaving the right way. We have to create safe, inclusive, accepting workplaces, and we can only do that by holding people accountable for the right behaviors.
Two, I'm going to cheat. The first one is train your managers, train our managers, train our leaders. I think it's incredibly important that folks feel as though they are empowered as leaders and as managers to ask their direct reports and their teams how they're feeling, how they're doing, how they're experiencing in the workplace from an inclusive lens. Something that everyone in this room can do is bear witness to people's experiences, right? If you see something that's broken, if you see a harm in the workplace, if you see that someone's down next to you, turn to the person next to you and bear witness to their experiences. And there's power in that, right? I see one of our ERG leaders back here, Katherine Johnson in the back, who's been such a champion internally about bearing witness to experiences that are happening in the world, because you never know what the person next to you is going through, especially for our organizations that are struggling with diversity and inclusion. Safety is so important when you walk into the workplace, and having someone to lean on, like this team here, is incredibly important to this work and to bringing our vision to fruition.
Jolen.
I'll say a couple. I'll say two then. I promise I'll be short.
Then I get second.
No, I promise to be short. Two things. This idea of psychological safety and creating that safe space for people is tremendously important. So be a leader who creates a psychologically safe space for your teams. The second is understand, unpack, track, and measure your data.
Maggie.
Oh,
I have a feeling you got a good one for us.
No, do you know what? For me, I think the one thing that I would say to people to go away and do is actually get rid of the word diversity and inclusion. So I work for the Rugby Football Union. I'm on the council there, and thank you. You guys are so good. Honestly, really good. And I'm on the diversity and inclusion working group, and we're trying to get change in the world of rugby in England. The minute we start using the word diversity and inclusion, we straight away isolate ourselves from those who we're trying to include. So what I would always say is change that word, change both of those words, and find what connects you to people you want to get along. So find the ones.
It's a better word.
Well, for us, in rugby, we talk about growing our game. So actually, that connects everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, what you do. It's about growing our game, and that's what we try and change, and that's what we try and talk about. That's our narrative that we try and use. So I would say change the word diversity, change the word inclusion to something that's actually a bit more positive, because at the moment that word, unfortunately, both those words have started to take a bit of a negative perception on it, which is a shame, but I would say change those words.
All right, that's very specific. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.